We've been told so many number of times that Nepal was never colonized. We started actually believing it. Thankfully, there are many people who are looking the old pages of history and finding out that there are new things that were kept in the shadow. Nepal was softly colonized after the Treaty of Sugauli up until 1923.
So we're about to enter a very thought-provoking and some might say even controversial topic. There's a whole argument online right now that Nepal was in fact colonized, in contrary to what we've been told or what we've been taught at school, that Nepal was never colonized. One of the conversations that we've been having in the last few days is about this topic. So, Mr. K, you claim that Nepal was actually colonized, opposed to what historians say. And on top of that, you're saying it actually benefited Nepal. Care to explain further?
Sure, why not? Let's dive into it. We've been told so many number of times that Nepal was never colonized. We started actually believing it without questioning many different things that happened in the history. Thankfully, there are many people who are looking the old pages of history and finding out that there are new things that were kept in the shadow. So one of the very first thing that I would like to start with is saying that Nepal was softly colonized after the Treaty of Sugauli up until 1923. It was only in 1923 that Britain recognized Nepal's sovereignty, ending any ambiguity about its independence. So that begs the question, what was the status of Nepal before 1923?
Somewhat of a protectorate state?
Yes, Nepal was given a protectorate state similar to Bhutan.
But what exactly is a protectorate state?
Just a nicer way of saying that, hey, you can still do everything that you want to do within your boundaries, but anything external, you are not allowed to do. All our foreign affairs were supposed to go through the East India Company. Meaning, yes, we were independent in some ways, but the most powerful person in your country did not have the master control of the nation that we live in.
It's from my understanding, it seems like it's more of a soft form of colonization.
Exactly.
You also mentioned the Treaty of Sugauli. Where is Sugauli?
Sugauli is currently in modern day India. It's in Bihar. So that was the place where there was a treaty. And the reason why Nepal and East India Company had the treaty was because Nepal lost a war. If we roll back to Prithviraj Shah and his greater unification project of Nepal, he and his descendants, they managed to occupy Sikkim, Darjeeling up till Teesta in the east and a greater section of present-day Uttarakhand in west. So we stretched really far, and that is when we started to enter into the territories of East India Company, which they didn't like, and we had a second war. And the reason why I'm saying this was a second war is because when Prithviraj Shah attacked Kathmandu, back then, Kathmandu was also had some sort of a good relationship with East India Company, and East India Company sent support to defend then Kathmandu. They were defeated very badly in the Battle of Sindhuli Gadi. So that was the first war when the troops of Prithviraj Shah, they defended Kathmandu.
Nepal also at some point attacked Tibet.
We Nepalese keep on telling that we didn't ever lose or we were never annexed, we were never colonized, but the truth is a bit more nuanced. Nepal, funnily enough, we stretched it so far that we, at some point in time, we even attacked Tibet. Tibet was a protectorate state of China, the Qing dynasty back then, and then Tibet sought help from China. And China pushed back us till Nuwakot, and that is why we had a treaty. We have a treaty that doesn't get too much highlight or too much mention is the Treaty of Barawati. Now, again, it's a thing, right, where Chinese documents say that China won, and on Nepalese side, the Nepalese documents say that Nepal won.
And is it also true that there is no original documentation?
Yeah, I think we heard that Nepal is missing the original copies of the Treaty of Sugauli. That's a different treaty. One of the most interesting thing that stands out in the Treaty of Barawati is that Nepal had to give a tribute every 5 years to the Qing dynasty, and the Qing dynasty in return would also provide you a protectorate status.
State for China as well as India.
So Nepal became a protectorate state of China after losing Sino-Nepalese War in 1788, and Nepal became a protectorate state of Britain in 1816 after losing the Anglo-Nepalese War. And the fun fact, really interesting fact in this situation is that when Nepal was having an Anglo-Nepalese War. They tried to seek help from China, but at that point, China didn't come forward to help.
Interesting.
I guess they didn't bother because they were like, oh man, Nepal is having war at its southern border, which is like we need to cross the Himalayas. And not to mention that Beijing is 3,000 kilometers away from Kathmandu.
Okay, so keeping all this in mind, and let's go back to your original argument that Nepal was in fact colonized and it actually benefited Nepal. But how so, considering we lost a lot of territory?
Every cloud has a silver lining. Nepal's relationship with China is geographically blocked, and with India is open because of plains. Nepal was somehow freed from China's Protectorate State and entered East India Company's Protectorate State.
Britain replaced China as the big boss.
In some ways, yes.
So why did the UK agree to Nepal's full independence in 1923 then?
You need to know that between that 107 or 8-year period, Janga Bahadur Rana came into picture. He pushed down on monarchy. He and his regime started ruling Nepal for 104 years. They built a lot of trust and relationship with the East India Company. They wanted to be on the good books of them, actually sold a lot of lumber and timber wood from Nepal. They provided over 350,000 brave Gurkhas in the World War I and World War II, of which more than 30,000 died and many more were left injured or went missing. Nepal never really entered the world wars officially, but because of these treaties, a lot of our countrymen had to go and fight. And even before that, in the Great Indian Rebellion of 1857, it said that Janga Bahadur Rana sent a lot of troops to suppress the rebellion. I don't think it's said every day, but Nepal helped East India Company to suppress the Great Indian Rebellion of 1857. The Ranas would also invite a lot of East India Company high-ranking officials to do hunting in the forests of Nepal. So they would have hunting expeditions. You know, all these kind of things added a sort of a value to the East India Company that Nepal is in our good books. We have their trust. We trust them. So it's all right if we let them be independent. A lot of people credit Chandra Samsher Rana with his efforts of gaining independence from the East India Company. He had good relationship with then British King George V and also invited him in 1911 for a hunting expedition 12 years before the treaty. So he managed to pull that off, which is, I think, in some ways is an achievement, despite how cruel the Rana regime is often associated with.
True. No, but this is very interesting. But now what I'm curious about is Nepal being in middle or sandwiched between China and India. Until today, it's been maintaining such good relationship with both of them. But back then, dealing with East India Company or the Britain and China, the mighty China, it must have been very tricky.
If you look at the history of other similar countries that are somehow sandwiched between two great powers, they always have to play this balancing act where they need to please the both side and still be independent enough to work as a buffer state. I do think some mistakes were made when we tried to attack Tibet or when we tried or spread too far into the regions of East India Company. But again, you can only look at those mistakes in hindsight.
So would you or could you say that Nepal's history is more of a balancing act than just resisting colonization?
There's two folds to the answer. Say if India acquires Nepal, then it has more border that it needs to defend against China, and China will also be more vigilant with by sharing more amount of border with India. We act as a buffer. So I think both the China and India realize that it's in their benefit if there is a buffer state in between. And we all know that Nepal is not free from any kind of political influence of the China or India or the West, because we constantly hear that in the news.
Everyone knows, at least the word on the street is that it's been controlled by India and China and the US. It's very interesting to say that Nepal was never colonized. I guess we're going to have to rewrite history and teach our younger generation that, I mean, it still is true. Nepal was physically not colonized. That's 100%. But politically, it was definitely colonized and influenced.
I think we should be more aware of these kind of influences in our country and society, which is why we're having this discussion.
True. Well, wow, it's been a big refresher, at least for me. It's time for me to research more on what exactly happened and learn more about the history of Nepal. I guess I never thought I would say this, but I guess Nepal was never really independent.
Yeah, that's true in so many ways. And just before we end, I want to maybe just add 2 cents. There are a few books that I would recommend to understand this situation more deeply. We Nepalese have been told that we have never been ruled, and that is a very Orwellian thinking where the subjects or the population is directly aware whether they are being ruled or not.
You mentioned about 1984, right? You know, China was voted the safest country because there's like millions and millions of cameras everywhere you go, as soon as you step out of your apartment.
Then we have this another form of ruling that is depicted in this novel. And I think if you read this, or even if you read the summary of this, you'll get to know that there are more ways to manipulate the mass, and you don't have to necessarily go out with guns in order to control someone. I think we Nepalese should keep ourselves, just update our software or update our operating system in which we think and analyze the news and the politics and the events that happens around us.
Yeah, I guess we have to definitely be aware about our history, dig deep, I guess. Folks at home, want to ask you guys what you guys think. Please leave your feedbacks, comments, suggestions, arguments down on the
Comments
comment section. All right, guys, catch you soon.